This car is the most honest car you ever see.
It's been a dream ever since I've had it.
The first time I heard that engine screaming, I thought, I gotta have one of those.
For me, the cars have personality.
What's great about a BMW Classic is the community that surrounds it.
When you listen to that, that's why we're here.
Welcome to Classic Heart, the BMW Group Classic podcast. My name is JP, and I can tell you I thought I was car crazy, but our guest today defines the word car crazy on a complete new level. Jakub from Bratislava is a collector of BMWs, but even more specific of a special model of BMWs. And that's not all, because his heart really beats for everything that has four wheels and moves. So we could not think of any better guest today. So we just jump into the conversation. Jakub, welcome to Classic Heart.
Thank you, and very happy to be here.
Jakub, you grew up in Czechoslovakia, but you live now in Slovakia. So give us a little bit of an insight, because that was behind the Iron Curtain and then the Iron Curtain fall.
Yeah.
So tell us about the difference between growing up in Czechoslovakia and then becoming grown up in Slovakia in terms of car culture.
Yeah, so I was born in 87, so you can claim that I cannot remember anything about the Velvet Revolution in 89. But I do remember it, strangely, maybe from the pictures, or maybe this is just my memory, which never happens, I don't know. But I remember being on in the streets with my parents, with the keys, and ringing end to the socialist or communism and the regime. And it was really peaceful, and it was really inspiring in a way, and it's still with us. Those same squares that the revolution happened on are still being used by the public to express themselves. So I don't remember much from the communism era other than the fact that this big event happened. I never really experienced the real life in communism behind the Iron Curtain as my parents and grandparents did, but it's in our culture, obviously,
And could you feel, or did you see the political change at that time?
I remember knowing our presidents and how they changed and why they changed, and especially what they were driving. That I remember very well. So until 89, the government car they used was a big Tatra 613, only in black color if it was governmental. So this is the environment which I grew up in. And early 90s, if you compare, 90s in the free world or 80s in the free world, it was the best time to live in, I think, maybe apart from 60s. I don't know, depends on your vibe. But first kind of glances of the free world and of the products of the free world started to become legal in Czechoslovakia. I'm not saying that they weren't here before, because they were here illegally. The music was smuggled, the cars were you were able to buy some foreign cars legally through shops that were called Tuzeks, but no one could get hold of money that you can spend there. So it was called bonds. So it was a strange time, but early 90s was really like a spring in a way for our environment, our countries, because everything started to grow up.
And we keep forgetting that, because today everything is taken for granted. But the opening of the Iron Curtain, above all, made it possible to access Western products.
Yeah, foreign cars started to drive on the roads more and more often, and people could travel. So you could see the free world being kind of imported naturally, but also by people in what they wear, what they drive. Yeah.
And what kind of cars did you see, for example, in 1991 on the roads?
We had Olcit, we had Dacias, we had Škodas, we had Trabants, we had Wartburgs. That was it, basically. Maybe Moskvich. Better cars were like Tatras and stuff like that. So that's really... and those cars, even when they were new, they were 30 years old compared to the free world. So even though you had bought a new car in 88, it was 30 years old technologically compared to what you have in Germany, for example. So every time I saw something flashy, something, completely different in terms of design, sound, and how fast it could travel. It was usually a German car or a foreign car. So that's where the fascination for specifically German cars and BMWs comes from, in my case.
So what was the first memory of which car you have been driven in?
Trabant 601 Deluxe Combi version with Hikomat clutch. If you're familiar with this special equipment, it was actually a semi-automatic clutch pedal.
Yes.
So the car was owned by my grandfather. It had manual gearbox and gear lever behind the steering wheel, but you could switch off the clutch pedal. So the clutch would work automatically when you press the gear lever. So this was a minty green color, and my grandfather passed away a few years ago, but we still have the car. So it was actually given to me by him as part of this, last goodbye. So I always had like special relationship with that car.
As so many Germans, right? Because, for us, having also a history with the Iron Curtain, the Trabant was always, especially after 89 and in the 90s, was like, funny enough, also a sign for a change.
Yeah.
Right? Because you would expect that people throw them away, but I don't know how it was in Slovakia or in that time Czechoslovakia, but in the eastern part of Germany, they had to wait like 20 years for a car until they can purchase a Trabant. And it was very expensive, by the way. It was not like that it was a cheap car to have. And I think the biggest euphemism in terms of the Trabant is calling the 601 the deluxe version. I think I think that's a very pure definition of luxury.
Yeah.
But in the end, I don't want to make jokes on that cars because it became the icon of the reunification in our country. And for those living behind this curtain, the Iron Curtain, it was a sign of a little piece of freedom because you could move around. And I think we should not underestimate this philosophical relation to that car. And I totally understand why you kept this car. I mean, on the other hand, it was also kind of genius building out of nothing, like a bit of plastic, small engine, which lasted quite long, is also not too bad. And many bad jokes has been made about this, by the way, as well, in German. I don't know how it's in Slovakia.
Yeah,
but
same.
So the amount of jokes is incredible.
Yeah, I mean, it's a source of jokes and fun, that car. Like any car built behind the Iron Curtain in those days, it was technologically, it was nowhere near what the free world had, but emotionally, it was, as you said, it was a symbol of... it was the first car people drove through the borders to Germany as well, and here as well. The first country we traveled was probably Austria, because that was the only free country around us, basically. In Hungary, we could travel before, in Ukraine, of course, Poland as well. It was not so common, but Austria was probably the first country we drove with Trabants, and we actually did. My parents, the first trip we took abroad was to the first town. Bratislava is 60 kilometers from Vienna and 500 meters from Austria, basically, because we share the river.
And, I remember the first Trabant I saw after reunification in Germany, on the western part of Germany, on our roads, like in Hamburg. And they became such an icon, but completely disappeared nowadays. It's a pity because this is really a part of our history.
Yeah, if you look at how much Trabants actually sell in United States nowadays, it's incredible. And the thing is that these symbols of communism, you should be able to find them in Czechoslovakia, Poland, Russia, in the Eastern Bloc, but they're no longer here. They're disappearing, and they are actually here nowadays, much more expensive than they were 5 years ago. So they are becoming a collectible item, not only for Westerners, but also for us, because they disappeared, because there was these old cars were scrapped in a matter of years very quickly when they were, not really collectible items. So maybe my plan for the future with it would be to have electric drive with it. Maybe that would be a joke of itself, having electric Trabant.
It makes completely sense. This car is super light due to the, it's unfair to say plastic body, but in the end, it is kind of plastic because there's less metal used. So it's very light. The drivetrain is super simple. The only problem might be that if you have the battery in the back, that it might be a bit too heavy to get the reach. But it's worth a try, I think. And you're right, the prices are crazy at the moment. I mean, you can't get them. I just saw in Leipzig there was a light blue 601S Deluxe, like S like the Sonderwunsch, so special wish department, whatever that meant.
Well, that meant the deluxe badge, basically. That's it.
And I think it was also two-tone, like you have the roof in a different color than the rest of the body. That was an option you took only for the deluxe version, as far as I learned long time ago in a reunification museum in Berlin, by the way. So because they have also a Trabant as an exhibition piece there. And but coming back to the price, so they're asking like 15,000 euros for it.
No, it's crazy.
And I remember right after the reunification, you could go over to Saxony or Mecklenburg and you can find them selling for 100 euros. You can get, or 100 Deutschmark at that time, you can get easily a Trabant. Funny. And Jakub, you said you remember what cars the politicians back then were driving. So I would like to know, what impression did these cars leave with you?
Obviously, the first foreign car that our government used, which is what, was always perceived as the best cars you could buy, is the ones that government buys, right, for its officials, because it's not their money, so they better spend it well. So the first thing we saw from abroad in terms of government car was actually a BMW 7 Series. And those were the first cars like E32, E34. Actually, our president, Dubček, died in a car accident in BMW E34. So if he was driving E32, it might have been different. But sorry about that, he wasn't. So yes, this is where my passion for cars comes from.
Yeah, and I'm super excited that you mentioned the word passion, because if you tell us now the number of 7 Series cars you have in your possession and you're the custodian for, then I think it's undoubted, no matter which other cars on that collection, that you are a BMW 7 Series collector. So if I would have a little drum here, I would start with a massive drum roll. But in this case, Jakub, tell us, how many BMW 7 Series are parked in your collection?
Parked is a good word, because most of them don't drive at the moment, but it's 15. I have 11 E32s and 4 E23s. So I've got so far only cars from the first 2 generations of 7 Series.
I mean, that's an astonishing number. And how much time did it take to collect this amount of BMW 7 Series from these 2 generations?
Surprisingly, not so much, because I only started collecting cars relatively recently in 2018, when I separated from my employment and I founded my own law firm in 2017. And in 2018, I bought myself, as a present for the first year, I bought myself E32 750 IL. And there's a story about the car, which I didn't know when I was buying the car. It was the most idyllic story of buying car from, German pensioner who bought it really new and invested a lot of money into it. And he bought the car as 2-year-old from dealer in Heidelberg. And the story goes, and he tells me that the car was used by BMW AG as a company car. Mm-hmm. So it's a 92. So, we can only guess who was the employee who was using 750 IL in 92 at the company. He was telling me that it was definitely board member's car, but, only BMW knows. And when I asked the archive, by the way, archive of BMW is amazing in itself, how they respond and what the information they have compared to any other car maker. They have full record of all cars, which is amazing. Especially if you talk to Maserati, for example, they don't even know how many cars they made in 60s. So
Again, cultural differences, I would say.
yeah, so I contacted the archive and they told me that it was a company car for 2 years, but from data protection reasons, they cannot tell me if it was a board member's car. So I think that in a way maybe confirms the story. So, you know, this is my fascination. This is why I love classic cars and young timers, because you can dream about what was happening in that car in 92. Maybe this person who was driven in it or was driving it, I don't know, was actually, you know, he definitely saw what was BMW planning for the 90s before the public saw it. And maybe there were some phone calls made, you know, maybe E38 was shaped in this car. I don't know. I mean, you can play your fantasy, which is incredible.
You know, what I like is the fact that your profession is data protection and they can't share the information with you because due to data protection. I think that itself is a very nice little side note on how you start getting into the BMW 7 Series world. Maybe there was also destiny, Jakub, destiny for data protection.
I believe in that, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And data protection got me to E32, basically. So
yeah.
It's a circle.
It's a vice versa game. Funny story. So, but do you remember the first time? So you sourced the cars, you spoke to the owner, contract was made, all that, and then the day you picked it up, what was that feeling for you?
I liked the car very much in terms of design already. It had a couple of scratches there and there. The bumpers were touched, but generally speaking, it wasn't rusted. So I thought that I bought really a good looking car from outside, but then I stepped in and the car had 160,000 kilometers when I bought it. So relatively, for BMW 7 Series, a low mileage car, basically. And then I realized that I have bought from the interior, I have bought a new car, basically.
Wow.
And I was fascinated by the quality of the leather, of the stitching, of the plastics. I was amazed by the car and by the engine, by the whole experience, because bear in mind, back then I was daily driving 2-liter 4-cylinder turbo engine from the modern times that has no sound, that has no emotion, and has good performance, good numbers, good consumption, but that's it. Yeah.
So, but then do you really drive the cars of your collection? So are you really taking them out on a road trip, for example?
People around me, they are like, we shouldn't take these cars for a holiday trip. We shouldn't take this car to a cottage with friends. I mean, those are old cars. I mean, we will be stuck somewhere. It will basically fall apart. And I was like, okay, this is a challenge, because I knew from the day one that these were the most high quality products ever made, in my opinion. Those cars can drive for millions and millions of kilometers. And I wanted to prove to myself and to everyone else that you can daily drive these cars still. And it has a meaning to me that I drive these cars daily. So today I drove to work in E32, actually the second one I bought. I'm using these cars every day, and that's also why they are so well kept, because when you don't use the car, you know, it starts to develop some diseases. And we have this challenge, like, if we get a car to our garage, whether we can drive it the same day on the highway. And with BMWs from 80s and 90s, we have made that challenge every single time.
Wow.
There isn't a BMW that came to our garage that we weren't driving the same day.
That's, I think...
That's just
that's
a testament
big
to
challenge.
quality.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think we need to add something on a very important part you said. So using old cars, classic cars, I think it's crucial. And there's one advantage. If you, for whatever reason, you have a breakdown or something, you will find in the remotest area, you will find an engineer, a mechanic, who is able to do something on these cars and repair it. With modern cars, it's nearly impossible, because you need someone who's studied mechatronic. You have
You need a computer,
the computers to read out what's wrong with the car. So yes, you might break down with the car, but there's always help around the next corner. So Jakub, may I ask, so how do you source cars? Where do you find them?
Well, I often get asked this because I often come up with car that people think is, collectible or special, like individual models or some rare color combination. This is what I collect basically or prefer. So I actually look at the same websites we all know, like Mobile.de, Autoscout, eBay Kleinanzeigen, or whatever. I look actually for adverts in Spain, in Poland, in Dubai, Qatar, UK, anywhere in US, auction houses. So I look at the same website everyone does. The only difference is how much time you spend with it and how quickly you can react to a new advert. Like, for example, I've seen this guy who is selling Alpina brakes for BMW E34. And I was thinking, like, where does he have them from? And why is he selling them? What's the story? I mean, how do you end up with Alpina brakes? There were only 500 cars made. I mean, how do you end up selling those brakes? I mean, what are the chances? I haven't seen them for sale for 5 years. So I write him, the brakes are sold already, but he says that he's got other parts. And he says that I've got this engine, I've got this transmission. And I'm like, why are you selling this? Why do you have spares on such a rare car? And he says he's got a whole car. So that's how last month I bought a project car. It is actually a crashed car. So it's not working, but we still managed to drive it the same day that it arrived. Yes. Without doors. So I actually, this is how I bought E32 B Turbo, which is one of my dream cars. Yeah.
I mean, Jakub, you're putting so much effort in restoring your cars. Do you have your own workshop for this? And would you say that the holy grail for you would be something like the Alpina B12 5 liters?
Yeah, I'm just in the process of speaking with one guy who is selling one.
Yes.
So this is definitely something that I'm looking into. B12 is like holy grail for E32. But I think what would be even better would be E32 with McLaren F1 engine.
Oh, yeah. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, well, I really mean that. I would really like to build that car one day. Unfortunately, the engine apparently, there is one for sale and it apparently costs 3 million euro.
Yeah.
Just the engine without transmission. But so if someone at BMW Classic is listening to this podcast and has a spare McLaren F1 that would like to spend the rest of the days in a nice E32, I'm here. I'm all yours. This is my dream car project, obviously with manual gearbox as well, because, that could be nice.
I think that would be a very good idea to create these things. And, maybe you should team up with Ken Block or like JP Performance here in Germany, who are absolutely into doing crazy things. And if you do like mine, I mean, with JP, he does a lot of crazy conversions already. So that would be something I would pitch to him if I were you, because that would be like crazy.
Yeah, sure. I'm sure that if you put a 3 million euro engine in a car, it wouldn't lose its value to 1 million, right? The engine would be still there.
Absolutely.
So it can only go up. But my idea would be just to keep the car as much original as possible. So that's my dream project. But we are actually into producing our own headers for the M70 engines in our garage. So as we look at the engine, I think that's what even Alpina said when they were looking at the V12s. They do not have really useful headers in a way that the engine is down on power because of those headers. So if you produce really good headers, you can bring up the power of the standard stock engine really high. I mean, the engine was not made, I mean, it has 300 horsepower, but I think, BMW with their concept, with the M8, I think that was around 550 horsepower. So it has a lot of potential, the McLaren engine confirms that. So I think if we don't buy McLaren engine, so be it. We'll have 400 horsepower, maybe 500 horsepower E32 anyway, hopefully one day. So that's the goal, to build the ultimate E32. But, we need a couple more years.
Every good thing takes some time. That's what I think. And, as long as you have the idea, that's all going into the right direction. Looking at your 15 cars, what is the most special car in terms of, like, where you say, okay, it's very, very unique in that color combination. It has been treated by BMW Individual. So what would be the one where you think really that's, of course, I think always the first child is very important, yes?
Yeah.
And I don't want to ask you which of your BMWs you like the best, but which one means a lot to you and you're very proud to have it in your collection. Let's put it that way.
Well, if you just look at the 7 Series, obviously the first one, which was owned by BMW, is pretty special to me. That's like rockstar black on black car for me. But there is nothing in terms of rarity. The Diamond Schwarz was every second BMW was in that color. That was the most popular color. So in terms of rarity, I think from 7 Series, I've got this 740i short wheelbase shadow line in brilliant rot color, which was not available for 7 Series. There was a M5 or M3 or 3 Series color, very sporty and very close to Ferrari red actually. And I have 2 E32s in that color. I don't know how many pieces were made, but that is probably the rarest in terms of color combination. Then I've got this security version of 750iL with Panzer glass or bulletproof glass. This car I was buying for almost 2 years. The process was that long because someone bought it before me from Bulgaria. It was used by Bulgarian National Security Agency until 2010, I believe. And then it was bought by actually Mark, who is a photographer for Top Gear magazine. So we traveled to UK.
Yeah.
And I bought it from him through the Bulgarian contacts who was happy to sell it to him in the first place. And then he introduced me to Mark. So that car, it's on the paper, it's individual, it's shadow line, it's long 750, and it's security. So that combination, beats everything in terms of rarity. I think it's one of one car.
Yeah.
And then I've got this South African E23 M745i, which is a legendary car, which is a legend of itself. There were 200 cars made, but it's estimated around 50 are still alive somewhere. Mostly not in Europe. In Europe, I think there are maybe up to 5 cars. I know about 2 others, both of them in Germany. And this is the only only, not real M5, but that's the closest you can get to, not M7, but the closest you can get to M7, because the story, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, with the E23 M engine 7 Series from South Africa. Yeah, I mean, that's incredible story for me.
Please share.
Because the 745, the top of the range 7 Series in Europe, was a turbo engine, 3.5 liter. And it was believed that the turbo adds, equivalent of 1 more liter of naturally aspirated. So that's the story. And that's actually a really good engine. I've got actually one of those, and it's incredible engine. But if you wanted to make a right-hand car for right-hand drive markets, you would end up with the steering column in the place of the, I think it was turbo and the air components in that car, and you couldn't place those on the other side of the engine. So they couldn't produce turbo engine with the right-hand drive. Wow. So what they did in South Africa was that they ordered 200 shelves with actual BMW VIN number, scratched on the body without the engine. And they put M5 engines in them. And they basically sold it as 745. And I believe they didn't even mark it in South Africa that this is an M engine, because there was no M badging usually available outside. So this is the M5 engine powered 7 Series from South Africa. And I managed to ship one to Slovakia, and I actually have it registered in Germany nowadays. So,
I mean, these were the days, right, when this was possible still.
yeah.
I imagine if Munich would say, if the subsidiary in South Africa is now saying, ship us just some bodies down here, some shells, and we take care of the rest. So I think, so it's just, but it's very practical. So we can't fit a turbo because of the right-hand drive position. Boom, what we do is we install an engine that works with it. So, yeah.
And they even raced it in South Africa. There is this famous E23 that was actually winning races in its class in Group A, I think. So it's actually a very good base for a racing car, which was never tested here in Europe, but they realized that, I think, in South Africa.
Jakub, I just can tell you, this is why I love this kind of podcast series, because every single time I learn something which is completely new to me. And, you can't imagine how many hours I spend after the podcast recording, no matter with any guest so far, and looking up and looking at YouTube videos, spending times in forums about special topics. And I think for everyone listening, please get inspired. Try to look it up. I mean, just type in E32 South Africa. I think that will help by Googling, and you will learn a lot. So, Jakub, where do you store all these cars? I mean, is that do you have a big garage below your house, or where do we find them?
Very good question that I struggle with on a daily basis. So we've got different locations. I mean, just to explain, there are cars in my collections that I wouldn't count. If you ask me how many cars I've got, I don't really know, because some of the cars are just, donor cars or shells or cars that we will, basically use to produce from 1 car or something like that. So I don't really count the cars, and I lost the count already, but it's probably, in my case, around 30 plus, and in my father's 20 plus. So we have a lot cars to store in between us, and I'm actually storing most of the cars, in those that drive and those that are ready or that are functional. I store in my office, underground garage parking, where I have 20 plus parking lots.
So your guests can't
quite a lot for
Your guests can't park there because, I'm sorry, you have to park outside. They are all taken.
Yeah. Guests and employees park outside, unfortunately, but because they don't care about their cars, so why should they park? Inside. They don't care about whether their cars rust. So you can park on the gravel. Yes, exactly. So there's a lot of parking lots for small law firm, and then we have, I think it was 2 years ago and 1.5 years, we have bought with my father a former chicken house, basically a type of building that, in industrial part of outside of Bratislava, that was used as a chicken farm, basically.
Yeah.
And we have converted that into our own workshop where we also store the cars. So we have, 3 lifts, and now I would say 3 guys that I wouldn't say that are working there, but that are enjoying our cars there while working on them. And that's where we store cars, plus, of course, at home. But that's not really that many cars that can fit there. So, and some cars are, few cars we have sent for renovation. So, for example, my father has the most valuable BMW he has is BMW 503.
Wow.
And currently it's under complete renovation, and it's in complete pieces. So currently the car doesn't even exist, I would say, because it's just what is left of it after the acid bath. So some cars are not even with us, and they're being renovated somewhere else. So, but it's a struggle, to keep the cars working, to drive them. And and that's also the reason I have to drive those cars daily, because they would, suffer if you wouldn't drive them from time to time. So I can tell you that with the batteries and all the keys and everything, it's quite a mess sometimes, but that's why I also have to drive the cars on daily basis.
Yeah. I would like to come back to the 503, because I think we need to pull this one into the spotlight, because of course Albrecht von Goetz's pinnacle design was the 507. Again, particularly not a car I like because for me it looks too pretentious. Like, I understand all the things when he said, I would like to have a car which is, even while parked, have like a moving appearance. All good. But the proportions are not right for me. Just a personal thing. And I always favored the 503, which I saw in a German collection the first time in my life and was asking, what is that car? And they say, yeah, that's also Albrecht von Goertz's car. And you know, for me, this is really a lesson in elegance. It's absolutely stunning. Engine is fantastic. I think it ticks all the boxes. And if you have this car in the right color combination, which is not red and not ivory, in my opinion, and I would go for the coupe. So I'm very specific about the 503. But a gray silverish one would really work for me. So congrats to your father for that choice. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, it's in terms of color, it's actually like very light azure blue.
Wow, nice.
And it's got originally, nowadays it's a pile of junk because it's completely in pieces going through the renovation process. But we bought it in white color, and it's still got original dark blue interior. And this is what the color combination, like blue and blue, light and dark blue. I mean, I like that, especially if the light is outside.
It sounds very delicious, I have to say. So it's exactly down my alley. I mean that.
But did you know that they made 503 actually has aluminum body shell?
No, this I didn't know.
Yeah, we didn't know it as well. That's why we are.
And now it's going to be very expensive to take it apart. Thank you, Mrs. Aluminium.
Yeah, it's a painful process to renovate any of these cars. For example, like Touring was famous for doing aluminium shells, but they welded it somehow with a steel frame.
Yeah.
And what is always rotting is obviously the connection between steel and aluminium. So we didn't know actually when we were buying a 503 that this is also the case. And not only that, but it has aluminium outer panels and steel inner panels that are somehow welded together. And then there is a steel frame. But the good thing with BMW is, like, I think this is still like a post-war era, and everything about the 503 is so robust. It's like Panzer tank, from the old days. Like, it's so thick, and there was not so much of a rust, but because you bath in different liquids, the aluminium and the steel, we had to completely torn it apart, and there was no way we could, you put the whole body in there. We had to also, because of the curvy windows, the actual car was cut. So now we have like 4 corners of the car. They returned from the bath, and what's left of the steel and the aluminium has returned, and now it will have to be fitted together. So yeah, it's a long project ahead of us.
So while listening to you, Jakub, one question is absolutely clear, and I think must be asked, is we know you're a lawyer, but what would be your other dream job?
So I think the closest to it, I'm getting there somehow. We do not have a business as of yet with our cars and with our garage and with our small team, but we actually do produce cars in a way. So we do renovate cars. We do not make new cars, but we actually take a rotten car and make it a brand new car. So that's incredible process. And I don't actually do anything with it. I just, visit the shop almost on daily basis, and I order parts. I help where I can change wheel. I help to change the engine. I can hold stuff, and I'm getting better in it, but I cannot really do anything with cars other than to maybe work as a lawyer and fund this dream together with my father to build cars. But my dream job would be to take a classic or young timer car and renovate it into modern standards in terms of connectivity, in terms of enjoyment, in terms of music. And I mean, I like new things in my old cars as well, but I just love the old engine, the smell of old leather, and the drive experience, which can be easily improved because those cars have massive power and performance reserves, so you can always make them drive better. So that would be my dream job.
You know, you already mentioned a nice resto mod car, which means to build in a McLaren engine into a 7 Series car.
Yeah.
So I think that could be the first project, very modest. No, joking apart, I think resto modding, and there's also two kind of opinions about it. One is get away with these Frankenstein cars like Singers and others. And the other opinion is, why not? Why not taking something beautiful from the past and make it usable? Right? So a friend of mine who is also part of the Flitzer crew, he does the following. He's like a geek in terms of electronics. So he takes the old radios, like the Becker Mexico, but the original one, and installed there a Bluetooth connectivity thing, and very discreet. You don't see it. You don't see it. There's he put it on the security summit button, which is not used anymore because we don't have the broadband anyway. But it says still
I have that
middle
in
wave.
all my 7 Series. Sorry,
Yeah.
That's exactly what I do.
Yeah, perfect.
It's perfect way to upgrade
Yes.
the old sound system.
Because you don't destroy anything which made the car. The car
Exactly.
is itself is very strong. So that's make it usable to have like the convenience of driving somewhere with a free speech microphone stuff. That makes total sense. But Jakub, let's cut back to your collection. So please share with us, how does your collection look like and why do you concentrate on collecting BMW 7 Series?
Most of my cars are BMW, but that's a reason behind it, because I like the era, I like the quality, I like the time, the decades. I like those times in terms of culture, in terms of music as well. Most of my favorite music comes from 90s and 80s actually. So I like those times and I like those cars. And back then, I think there has never been time when BMW was on top of their game compared to the competitors.
Yeah.
And they're just pinnacle of motoring development. And that stands maybe even today, but today the technology itself doesn't interest me that much. I'm not really into tablets myself. So I like the old-fashioned technology. I like the buttons actually. I'm missing buttons in new cars. I can't buy a car which has no buttons. But you remember in the 80s or 90s, the cars that we were used to in this part of the world. One thing is to look at them in the day. The other thing is to drive them in the night. And that's where I did most of the driving with my parents. And I remember usually in a car, you would see speaking as a kid visually, you would see 2 or 3 lightened circles.
Yes.
Those were the Teco, the Speedo, and maybe something else. If it was a luxury car, it had 3. So this is how I recognize the cars. It has 2 or it has 3 of these circles at night. So wow, Tatra had 5. So that was amazing. And then I was driven in probably 94. I was driven in E34 BMW. And it had the same board computer as was in E32, the more spec cars. And I can tell you from a children perspective, I didn't understand what that was. That technology was so far ahead of all SITs, Dacias, and all the instrument and all the lighting in the cars and everything that was at night visible and in car dashboards, that when I saw that, there is a sign written in letters, then there is a button and the button is illuminated and the sign is illuminated. And I was thinking like, what do you do with that? You press the letters or you press that thing under it? And why is it? I was in complete shock. And then, you open the doors and the car did say, Tür offen. Like, how did it know that the door is open? I mean, that's some of the things that were back then introduced in E32. Like, it's the first car, in my opinion, which has wire-operated electronic gas, basically, 750. And you can feel it that it's really like punchy compared to 740, which doesn't have that, and it's really soft, old school. It has self-leveling Nivo suspension, so no matter how much weight you put on the car, it still have the same ride height for the optimal performance. It was, I think, the first car with xenon headlights, It had a board computer which was telling you exact consumption, range, time. It had actually a stopwatch. It had, you had language settings there. You had so many little things. Like nowadays, I'm not missing a single thing in my E32 except Bluetooth. That's the only, and I have it there, so I'm completely fine with the car. It had airbags. It had electronic damper system, so you had sport and comfort mode. It had electronic stabilization system, which actually works really well. So anti-slip system. It has sport mode for the transmission, winter mode for the transmission, and normal mode for the transmission. It had actually, you could yourself in E32, you can set, I have never used it, but you can set how many seconds interval you want to have between your wiper movements. You can do that in that car. And imagine you compare those cars now to those also. And plus, it's the first German car and the first worldwide car that was electronically limited to 250 kilometers, which is now a standard, right? So V12 engine, first after the Second War. I mean, amazing car.
I mean, the E32 was and is golden. I mean, what a car. But another thing is that right after our podcast going to be published, we will also see you in a little video series that BMW Group Classic started on their own YouTube channel, Our Brands, Our Stories. And what was your feeling when they approached you first to say, Jakub, we would like to do a video about you and your love for BMW 7 Series?
Well, it was actually the other way around, because Simon, who shoots these films for BMW for a long time, he was at Sreten's garage, his channel M5 39 Restorations. I mean, it's quite famous in our community. He was actually sharing on Instagram story saying that BMW Classic is looking for someone with E23 to do a 7 Series film. And there was a contact for Simon, the director, to approach him. So I approached him and I said, I've got 4 23s, but I'm more actually into E32s and I've got 11 of those. And he was like, okay, I think I found the guy. And I was the first one to write him, and he responded basically the same day, and we planned his trip to Bratislava, and I loved it. I mean, it was incredible experience especially because he's such a nice person and open-minded. He lives in States and Germany, so it was pleasure just to be with him, but also the fact that someone notices what we do here in Slovakia is very, very important and nice to me. This will help to show that there are people who love the cars here and who can restore them, who know the cars. Because people who know these cars are dying, and it's amazing. I have this great 3, guys in our garage that understand these cars completely, and I was really humbled by the whole experience. Yeah,
great. As you might know, Jakub, we have a little bit of a service part as well in our podcast. So Classic Heart is not only entertaining for the ears or listening to, it should be also like a little advisor for a special thing. And here comes my question. I assume not many people have visited Bratislava at the wonderful River Danube and the shores. So if I'm a car crazy guy, girl, man, woman, whatever, if I'm car crazy and I would like to visit Bratislava or Slovakia, what would be your advice? What is a must to see?
That's a tough question. I would definitely advise not to come to Bratislava in the rush hour. Not really great city to drive cars, to be honest. So there's a famous hill outside of Bratislava, which is used for hill climb racing as well. If you really want to enjoy cars, we have circuits called Slovakia Ring, which is not far away from Bratislava, maybe 40-minute drive. and that's really a tough circuit. There you need the stiff car, and I had the opportunity to drive on Brno circuit in Czech Republic, which is 1 hour from Bratislava.
Yeah.
I prefer Brno circuit to Slovakia ring, actually, because that's more like an old school car circuit. And if you like classic cars, because I understand you are more famous for classic cars than young timers as such, so there are a couple of classic car events during the summer, especially in Slovakia, that are worth attending, and I will be attending them, and I have. We have this race called Slovakian 500 kilometers, which is a historic race. There will be something very special, I can tell. There is also the Czechoslovakian 1000 kilometers, which is more like a pre-war race car, something like Mille Miglia. Many people don't know that, but actually it has the same heritage, and it was on the calendar back then, the 1000 Czechoslovak miles, and that goes Prague, Bratislava, Prague. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I think it gave many nice things for us to do. We try to add them into the show information on the podcast channel. Jakub, I really appreciate the time, like bringing us into the world of the early BMW 7 Series and also the passion for cars and how car culture is celebrated in Slovakia. So thank you very, very much for joining us today.
Thank you. It was real pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
And for everyone listening in and Classic Heart, of course, we would appreciate if you leave us some comments on how you like our podcast series. I mean, we're starting now into season 2, which is, I think, a big achievement. And that's also thanks to the whole team and the background. And there we have to mention Friederike, Alexander, and many others who are taking part in everything we're doing here. Is absolutely fun. And so please rate us and give us a comment what you maybe like to hear as well from us. So we're super eager to listen in and listen to what you guys are thinking we should do. Thank you very much, everyone. Jakub, safe travels in every BMW 7 Series you will drive in future. Thank you so much.
Thank you.